I like to give a speech about, the title says, what does it mean to do Islamic theology within a transhumanist world? So there is the problem of proving that we indeed live in a transhumanist world. What does it mean? And if so, what consequences does it have? And reflecting upon that, I am arguing that we need a new orientation in ethics, which is grounded in responsibility. So I will start with the godfather, I might say, of responsibility ethics, who is Hans Jonas, for me at least. And I like to read the quote in German, since I know Mauricio and Amri also understand. Die Technik, bringt durch die Wirkungen an den Tag, dass die Natur menschlichen Handelns sich de facto geändert hat und dass ein Gegenstand von gänzlich neuer Ordnung nicht weniger als die gesamte Biosphäre des Planeten dem hinzugefügt worden ist, wofür wir verantwortlich sein müssen, weil wir Macht darüber haben. Keine frühere Ethik hatte die globale Bedingung menschlichen Lebens und die ferne Zukunft der Existenz der Gattung zu berücksichtigen. What that means, dear Father Taylor, is that he says that through technological development, the nature of human action has changed, meaning that it has implications for the inaction of the moral value of human action, which spans to the whole biosphere of the planet, over which we must take responsibility. We have might over it. So, Hazel suggests that we need a new orientation in ethics because traditional ethics cannot respond to modern problems. So let me illustrate what he means by that. Let's consider this question first. If we could eliminate an evil in the world through an action, would it be moral to refrain from doing so? So the answer to this question seems pretty straightforward, because if someone would have a cure for cancer and would withhold it from us, we would think the worst of this person. So we don't need a new ethical theory to answer this question. But what about this question? What if a pill were devised that rejuvenated the cells in our bodies so that we were able to maintain our physical and mental conditions in their prime? What if we could even extract our minds from our God-given bodies and transfer them to more capable and powerful bodies, genetically engineered in laboratories? If such feats were within our reach, we would be able to eradicate all physical and mental diseases. So would it be moral from refraining to doing so? We learned yesterday from Stefan that the first part of this question is totally in line with Euro-transhumanism. The second part was the transfer of mind-uploading would not be within the conceptual ethics of Euro-transhumanism, but it would be classical transhumanism. So even if we would disregard that, so we will not have the mental diseases eradicated, but at least the physical diseases would be eradicated, and this would be, of course, a very big win. No cancer anymore. So should we refrain from doing so? Why is this problem new? Because it does necessitate the consideration of a different context to answer to it, and the traditional ethical approaches do not deliver us the tools to answer this. So what is the new context? The new context is what is called the Anthropocene. Of course, there is some discussions among scholars if we indeed are living in the Anthropocene era, but the Anthropocene era designates a geological era of the world that suggests that human action leads to distinction of the human race. Not only of the human race, but of our whole world as such. So, in this sense, it is the secular equivalent of what in religious terms is coined the apocalypse. With the main difference is we cannot do anything about the apocalypse because it is the hand of the Almighty God who has power over the reign of power over time and space. So the apocalypse will happen regardless what we do or not. But the Anthropocene can be prevented. if we alter the ways of our actions. Because Anthropocene isn't necessarily inscribed in our future if we believe in autonomy. That the time will end, it is the apocalypse. But how this time will end and if we prematurely kill ourselves, this is in our hands. And this whole is embedded in post-humanist discourse. Of course, we had the introduction to the branches of transhumanism, post-humanism yesterday. I don't want to go in this, but I want to highlight one term that is pretty important for discussion of Islamic approach that was not discussed well enough yesterday, and this is critical post-humanism. Critical post-humanism, one can say, is a direct opposition to humanist tenets, as there being the belief in constant progress and the anthropocentrism that is embedded within Enlightenment philosophy that puts the value of the human to the center of all being in the world. So they are saying we have to move away from pursuing constant progress, and we have to move away from seeing that we are the most valuable species in this world, upholding the value of animal, equating the value of animal and human. And this is a shift that we learned yesterday. The Euro transhumanism feels sympathetic with this. I don't see how it is systematically possible, but we can ask Stefan about it later. What is important for me is that we heard just a confession of a transhumanist religious man. So the most important feature of the post-humanist, transhumanist discourse is that it seems to be in divergence with humanist philosophy, and that humanist philosophy is basically the framework for atheistic thinking. But transhumanist philosophy, or post-humanist thinking as such in general, embraces religion. There are emergence of transhumanist religions. So the dialogue, to get in dialogue, to think along the way of these post-humanist thinkers is way easier than with humanist thinkers. This we can see in a publication of Roy Jackson, Muslim and super Muslim, and there he proposes, okay, why can't we have Christian transhumanist associations, Mormon transhumanist associations, why can't there be a Muslim transhumanist association? And he suggests these 4 tenets for such an organization. He says, first, we believe that the purpose of Islam involves the revival, ihya, and renewal, tajdeed, of creation, including humanity, and that we should work towards the elimination of pain and suffering, poverty, injustice, and death. Okay. 2, we seek growth and progress along every dimension of our humanity, whether this is spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, at all levels, individual, communal, social, and global. 3rd, we understand that the Islamic tradition is compatible with and complementary to many cultures, religions, and philosophies that likewise seek transformation and renewal of creation. 4th, we believe that the intentional use of technology will empower us to transcend our current state and move towards perfectibility, guided by the example of the Prophet Muhammad as the perfect human, Islamic Kam. Of course, you can imagine that no Muslim scholar is as enthusiastic as Roy Jackson in pursuing the emergence of transhumanist thought and Islamic credence. The first 3 tenets just seem to be simple and ethical argument, but we can discuss about that later. But the 4th tenet, this is the main reason why nobody will jump into that boat, because here a concept of Islamic Kamil, which is deeply rooted in metaphysical thinking, is now merged with technological development, and as if the Prophet would have technological, well, he has been a cyborg according to Stefan, but he didn't have our technological meaning of what this perfection means. So this seems very problematic here. But what necessitates now new orientation and ethics for Islamic theology? Now we have established that the question and the problematic has changed among the values of good and evil. The basic ethical worldview of a Muslim today is a mixture of three ethical theories that are also prominent in Christian theology and in philosophy in general. This is the intentional ethics, which is rooted in Islamic legal thinking and theological thinking, meaning that the value of an act is to be measured by the intention that was that started the action. Then the ontological ethics, meaning the upholding of my responsibility towards God. So this is rooted in legal reasoning. We find such reasoning also in Kant. And of course virtue ethics, which is revived nowadays again, which goes back to Aristotle and Plato, and we have a big tradition in Sufism and in Islamic philosophy of virtue ethics. So if a Muslim decides any action today, the thinking of morality is along the way of these three basic theories. How does it work? We have the example of a political actor who justifies a dangerous lie by appealing to the purity of his intention. This exemplifies the lack of personal accountability, because what would the political actor do to get his will done? First, he would go on the intentional ethics and say, my intentions are pure and God knows my intentions, and he would emphasize this point. Then he would have to have also a legitimate stamp on his intentions, which would go through a fatwa of a legal scholar, an authority. And he would say, okay, I issued a fatwa, a legal judgment, that the intention of this man is pure, and the telos, the vision of this man is aligned with the principle of Islamic ethics. What would he do in the third place? He would emphasize that he is a good character and he is only seeking the love of God, and he wants to improve the community of the Muslims, the so-called Ummah, and what he is going to do is along these lines. So, and he would tap on the principle of responsibility as it is required in Islamic legal reasoning. This is how political actors act today, and we can see that here arises a moral blind spot. The moral blind spot is that the political actor just rejects the sincere reflection of his own responsibility towards, will my action improve the destruction of society, and so on. So this moral blind spot that relies on ethics that is just based on the stamping of halal certificates. So basically, what that means is you have the choice between industrially produced halal meat and biologically produced not halal meat from your local butcher. So your own responsibility would lie to go to the biological one because it's more sustainable. But as a Muslim believer, you would say, but there's the halal stamp. I don't care, I go for what's halal. So this is the moral blind spot I'm talking about. So the goal is to raise awareness for this moral blind spot, and I'm arguing that we can only do it if we talk about responsibility again. Of course, Muslim scholars would say, yes, we have already the principle of responsibility at the very core of Islamic ethics. So what are you talking about? Because we have this concept of taklif, which means imposition obligation, but this is the responsibility which I meant as the legal responsibility. It only covers the responsibility of a Muslim actor against God And how does he know his own responsibility in an ethical dilemma towards God? He goes to his next imam, or the authoritative person who he believes is wise enough to help him. And this man would give him fatwa, to say, okay, you're good to go, God is good with you, there's no writing I can find that would be against this. And, you know, the world can burn down, I don't care, I have my fatwa that I'm a good person. So he said, I can drive my car. If as a consequence I destroy my environment, I don't care, it's not my taklif. So this is exactly what I mean by, this is not the philosophical responsibility that I'm talking about. Philosophical responsibility should go a step further and critically engage with the fatwa he has. And he has to come to the recognition that it is not okay to drive a car that burns fuel. So every time, at least, every time he turns on his car, he will have a bad conscience. And in the lines of the as long as it gets philosophy, this is as good as it gets. But this is a thing that alleviates the moral blind spot. You cannot hide behind the excuse of I got the fatwa anymore. Fatwa, you have to be taken responsibility of the consequences of your own actions. I won't read this part, but Max Weber emphasizes here that intentional ethics and responsibility ethics are not in contradiction to each other, but they are complementary. So he says basically that what I just mentioned. So I go on and talk about the telos of responsibility. So what is the goal of this new conception of responsibility based on the responsibility ethics of Hans Jonas? We could speak of all these examples, and I just want to highlight that responsibility ethics, yes, it centers the focus on my own. I have to take in consideration the consequences of my actions, basically. But it shouldn't be confused with consequentialism, because there's a very big difference between consequentialism and responsibility ethics. Let's take the toxic wastewater example. This is my favorite example. So, in a consequentialist mindset, the board of a company that produces our shampoos or something like this, they would first argue with their intentions. They would say, well, we are doing something good for this world, right? We are caring about the hair and the health of the skin of these people, so we are doing good. There's less stink in the world, thanks to us. So the next thing is about, okay, we are producing a lot of toxic waste in producing the soap. So what should we do with the toxic waste? Should we do our utmost to minimize the toxic waste and find ways to not disrupt our environment? Or should we take the cheaper action of not caring and waiting until some government issue comes down along and forces my hand? And as long as I know what forces me, I can just go with earning more. So what would the company do? The company's interest lies in maximizing its profits. So in consequentialist thinking, it happens what happens today in capitalist system. They will go with maximizing profits until someone comes and cuffs their hand. The responsibility ethics is something that is not discussed within the boards of companies, because it would say, okay, regardless of my government restricts me and says I cannot butcher the Amazon rainforest, my own responsibility tells me I should not, so I will not. I will take greater costs into consideration and smaller win margins as to save my environment, as to make sustainable products. Is this realistic? It doesn't seem realistic when we look at American capitalism, libertarianism, and so on. But so this goes beyond Islamic ethics, what I mean, but also Muslim businessmen think like this. they say consequentialist, and consequentialism is also very easily compatible with the classical theories that I mentioned. What is not so easy is to take responsibility ethics in the center again and remind what Muslims knew from the beginning, namely Big Brother is always watching, meaning God sees and hears everything that is even hidden from you. So a businessman who is considering this problem should not. And the other thing is, but the downside of responsibility ethics is it slows us down. Imagine a board who would consider every action and the responsibility. They wouldn't be able to produce anything new because they have to consider so much. Take the trolley problem. Should I engage and kill one man instead of 5, or should I not engage and let the foreseeing the thing? So what the consequentialists go for, okay, 1 is better than 5, I don't care, I take action and kill just 1. It will be consequentialist, and it seems right. Responsibility ethics, how do we consider the value of one person against this 5 person? Who is this one person? Who are these 5 persons? Are these 5 persons criminal? Is this one person a saint, or vice versa? So much to consider, and the action is done. So this is the problem with responsibility ethics. In order to bring this in fruition with Islamic theology, there arises some principles from consideration of what responsibility entails. First is the critique of taqlid, meaning the blind following of a religious authority. This is a very much discussed topic in Islamic theology, but responsibility ethics necessitates this. The second is the freedom as a foundation of morality. So we know also from Muslim scholar discussions that it is very hard to prove that we have free will. And if you follow along the lines of the Muslim tradition, it seems as of the opposite, as of the I'm lacking the word. The enemies of free will have won, because it is much easier to say God is almighty and I don't have power. It is easier to reason with theologically than to say God is almighty, but I'm still having power that he cannot reach him. And if we consider modern discussions of neurobiology and so on, it also suggests that, maybe our actions are just producers of chemical reactions in my body, or I myself am a product of my culture, and so on. There are so many reasons that you can put forward against free will, and so weak reasons for it. But responsibility ethics says we have to set it as a principle. So how can we deal with this in Islamic ethics, theologically? I will go on quickly. It also necessitates awareness and autonomy, following from freedom. Following from that follows in individuality in faith. So it gets really problematic to claim that someone is an unbeliever. It becomes nearly impossible to have the claim of the one true way anymore. And this creates a new dynamics in the discussion, in the discourse of the community of ethics. So, how can I anchor this as a Muslim theologian for the Muslim theological discourse? So my favorite protagonist is Al-Maturidi, who I wrote my dissertation about, and who is really one of the most original thinkers of Islamic theological discourse. So first, I am highlighting him because he has this focus and this weight on rejection of taqlid. Blind authority following is not acceptable, even if it means that you have to critically engage with the Prophet. So you have to doubt, okay, are you really the Prophet? You have to go through this process, otherwise you're not a true believer. He is that hard. And then he comes to the discussion of free will, and he says, okay, all the Ash'arites, the Mu'tazilites, all theologians, they lose themselves in this in these scientific discussions, and how many parts have an atom, and are there accidents, and is my soul an accident, and all these stuff, which are only theoretical, speculative, and they don't have any reliable evidence, material evidence to rely their discussion on. So he says, what...
You have only 2 minutes.
2 minutes, I'm finished already. So he says, what I can show with my bare hands and say, there it is, I don't need a theoretical scientific proof of that. And he says, I can show that free will exists. Go to your little child and force him to pray. And the little child will run away. And you will recognize in that running away his free will. He didn't submit, he revolted against your force upon him to do something he didn't want. So you can point the finger and say, okay, there you go, the free will. I don't need to prove that theoretically to underscore that free will exists. So he rejects this discussion. He sets it. That's what we need for responsibility ethics. And this mindset allows to engage or to reconsider empirical evidence much stronger than it happens today in the discourse of Islamic theology. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.